All right, welcome everyone for another blab that we've got going over here at Big Al's. And today we've got Aquatic Life with us, and we're going to be talking about RODI, RO systems, and the like. I know it's a really confusing topic for a lot of people out there. I know a lot of people don't really understand what RO is or why we might use it. So let's get right into it. I've got two fine gentlemen with me here. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
My name is Dave Troop, one of the owners here at Aquatic Life.
Mike Elliott, one of the other owners.
Right on, guys. Okay, so I'll kick it off with a simple question. What is reverse osmosis, and why is it important for us as aquarists?
Well, most customers are looking for the reverse osmosis to break the water back down to its most basic element, and then build the water back up to what they actually need for the aquarium. So a lot of the times you're taking that water with your total dissolved solids, your TDS values, you're stripping it down to basically a 0 TDS, and then whether it's live plants or if it's a saltwater system, you're then able to build back the nutrients that you want, and essentially have taken all of the ones out that you didn't want to be adding to the aquarium, and then just kind of rebuild it back into what you need for your particular application.
Right on. So is RO something that, your typical hobbyist is going to use, like your average aquarium owner, or is it, in your opinion, geared towards somebody who has maybe a specific issue with their water, or is caring for specific species, or in a certain scenario where that ultra clean water is necessary?
Most customers that we're finding using the RO systems are for live plant tank setups, lower pH value saltwater applications, discus tanks, South American cichlid type of systems, and then of course the reef tanks, basically trying to strip the water down so you don't have a bunch of excess nutrients, nitrates, phosphates, that type of impurity that's in the water that essentially just causes potential havoc in the systems.
Right on. So how does RODI differ from just straight RO? Like, what is the differentiation, and what is the benefit? Why would you want RO versus RODI, or vice versa?
The reverse osmosis systems typically will remove or reject about 95% of the impurities or TDS values of the supply water line. So depending on the application, a lot of live plant systems, or maybe even marine fish only systems, the RO would be plenty. They don't need to really strip the water down the additional 5% that's remaining into the water. But when you add the DI system in the after the membrane or post the membrane filtered water, you're able to take that remaining TDS value down to close to 0 or almost always at 0, depending on where the resin itself is actually at in its life. But you can take it down to 0 and really strip it down to really just straight water, and then for the reef tanks, you're looking then to, of course, add your different salt mixes and your different additives back into it after you get it down to its basic component.
Right on. Now, one question I've actually got that I've just been wondering for a really long time, because I haven't really gotten a straight answer yet. With RODI cartridges, they typically have some kind of indicator in with the resin to let you know when you should be changing that cartridge. Now, is that based on the period of time that DI resin has been exposed to water, or is it an actual level of exhaustion that it's showing you?
It is what your second half there is. It's the resin material has the ability to pull out a fixed amount of material or total dissolved solids. So the exhaustion rate varies depending on what the supply water line TDS values are. So if someone has, just quick numbers, if you have 100 TDS coming in, let's say you have a 95% rejection rate, you're going to have a 5 TDS remaining in the filtered water line coming out. So your 5 TDS that the resin cartridge would have to pull out would be, would last 5 times longer than someone that had a 500 TDS that left 25 TDS in the filtered water coming out. And then essentially you'll end up using the DI cartridge 5 times quicker. So it is a function of the amount of material that it would be filtering out, not just an amount of time that is actually in contact with the water.
Gotcha. Okay, I actually see a question here. So I'm going to read it out for the person. It looks like Jessica. Hi guys, curious to know why TDS reads higher than 0 in filtered water. So I guess what she's asking is, even after it's been through RO, why would the TDS still have a reading there?
Well, the membrane manufacturers are typically looking at that 95% rejection rate. So there is that 5% of whatever the supply water line or supply of water to the RO unit is. Let's say we'll go back to that 100 TDS in the supply line. The membrane manufacturers aren't going to filter out 100%. They usually give you a range of 93 to 97%, and you'll have the balance of that left over in the filtered water of just the RO.
So
I'm not. Oh, sorry.
No worries. I was going to say, so in her case, if she's still finding that with the RO only, she's reading TDS higher in her water, it might be a good idea to then maybe put like a DI extension on that unit that would help clean up the rest of the TDS.
Correct. And that's kind of, we look at the resin cartridge more for a polishing aspect of the water filtration system.
Right on.
So you're essentially, and again, it depends on the application. There's a lot of people with live plant tanks that aren't necessarily going to want to polish the remaining 5-7% of the TDS that's left over in the filtered water line out. And even some customers I have, they'll use the resin filtered water or even just RO water by itself, and then actually supplement or mix that ratio wise with their actual original tap water to basically just pull down the TDS, but not keep it at 0.
Right. The Aquatic Life RO Buddy booster pump. Do you guys want to tell us a bit about that booster pump? I know it's a really cool product, so I'd like them to hear it firsthand from you guys why that booster pump beats all others hands down.
Well, what our booster pump has done is allowed us to create a unit that can be incorporated into really just about any RO unit under 100 gallon per day. What it's doing is it allows a couple things that it will allow you to do. One, it does boost the pressure up to the membrane, which is most manufacturers have 125 PSI maximum rating for their membrane applications. The booster pump will actually boost the pressure up to about 100, between 90 and 110, depending on the application and how long the pump's been up and running. But in addition to that, it gives a couple additional features in that there's an auto flush valve assembly in it, so that when the wastewater line is actually hooked up to the waste of the RO filter, it'll open up or remove the flow restrictor and allow the membrane to be flushed for about 20 to 30 seconds. And then actually after that shuts down, it'll put the flow restrictor back into the water line and then start building the pressure back up against the membrane. In addition to that, it has a low pressure switch so that the supply water line is either shut off or not enough to keep the pump active and working properly. It'll shut the unit off. And then there's also a high pressure switch that if you have it hooked up to a float valve assembly or a solenoid that's used for top off, when the pressure builds up on the filtered water line side, it will then also activate the high pressure switch and then shut the entire unit down. So it is really kind of turbocharging really just about any RO system that's in the industry today. We had our older units that we had sold that actually had everything built into it, right. But this one actually allows us to improve or increase the pressure to just about any manufacturers.
Right on. So a typical pump's only going to do the one job of taking that pressure and moving it up to where it should be optimal for operation of the unit and not give the rest of those features that you just mentioned.
Correct. There are some systems that do exist. They don't necessarily have all the additional features. You definitely want that low pressure switch. really would recommend that if you're going to put a booster pump on it, just so that if the supply water line is actually dropped to the pressure below or the supply of the water below where the pump needs to operate, it would actually then shut it down and not allow the pump just to try and continuously boost the pressure without actually having the ability to do so.
Right on. Okay, we actually have another question here, so I'm going to read that one out. Does an RO unit waste a lot of water?
There's a couple ways to go around that. It can waste a lot of water. Most traditional in the past membranes usually had very high ratios of filtered water to wastewater, and that was it was done by the fact that the membranes had cost a considerable amount of money. I'm going to go back maybe 10 years ago. Membranes were extremely expensive. You needed to flush the water across the membrane. You didn't want to foul the membrane very quickly. But with the cost of the membranes actually coming down considerably over the last several years, what we're finding is people are looking at more of, can I change the ratios to actually get less wastewater? And by changing those ratios, and you might have the membrane not last as long, but because the price of the membrane has come down, you're able to actually look at it more as a filter cartridge than a 2-year life expectancy with real high wastewater ratios. Maybe you're looking at 6 months to a year, but you go from a 1 to 4, maybe you can go down to a 1 to 2. The other things that you want to keep in consideration too is with the wastewater and the flow restrictors, you want to consider manually flushing, or like the Smart Buddy that we have, where it automatically flushes the membrane and kind of gets any of that buildup on the membrane off to basically extend the life of the membrane. So it can waste a lot, but it doesn't have to.
Right on. We actually have another question, another good question, actually. Melinda's asking, can I connect the RODI system to the hot water line?
I wouldn't recommend it, because the membrane manufacturers typically have a maximum threshold that can be easily exceeded with the hot water line, and then it'll just destroy the membrane. You'd almost be better off using the cold water line, just to make sure that you're not going to damage the membrane. Your production actually will go down depending on what the temperatures are, but the typical temperature that the manufacturers are looking for of any of the membranes is right around 75, 77 degrees Fahrenheit is the optimal temperature based on their gallons per day rating.
Gotcha.
So I would not recommend it.
So you should be running like essentially lukewarm water. So you'd optimally want to hit that 75 degree Fahrenheit, but I figure you'd say cold water line safer just based on the fact that you can actually destroy the unit using hot water, or at least the membrane, not the whole unit, but the membrane itself you can destroy with hot water.
Yes, that would be the biggest concern if someone's trying to. I mean, it happens. You try and regulate the temperature, and someone hops in the shower, or something like that, where it changes the temperature quite drastically very quickly. You'd have to keep that into consideration.
Right on. So Reptifin's got another great question. In regards to the wastewater, can it be used to do laundry or water houseplants? I hate to waste water. Would the water be too hard?
Actually, we have recommended this quite a bit with specifically water and houseplants. What I would be considerate of is maybe what their initial TDS value is. Typical drinking water applications are 500 TDS or lower. I would hate to have too many salts build up on with the plants and that type of thing, but depending on what the ratios are with the flow restrictor, you could certainly use it for house plants. I would just do a little checking beforehand. Doing laundry, I wouldn't see why that would be a problem at all. And a lot of the times people will store it and use it there's really nothing harmful in it. So it could be used for just about any application. You just want to verify what your TDS value would be coming out of the wastewater.
Right on. Here's a question I'm going to ask, kind of to follow along with that. The wastewater itself, what has the water gone through? Once it goes into the unit, it comes out waste, but what has it actually traveled through to get to that waste line?
Okay. What specifically would end up being the membrane itself. The membrane is a wound material, and the way the material is designed is it's reverse osmosis. So instead of being osmosis where everything equalizes within a body of water, it's actually that membrane is actually separating the water with impurities and only majority allowing water itself to pass through the membrane. So that's why when you look at a membrane housing, you have the wastewater line side, you have the filtered water line side, and that membrane is basically restricting anything but water to go through the membrane. So it's going through the membrane on the filtered side, but on the wastewater side, all it's doing is concentrating the materials into a more concentrated form, into a concentrate. So that's what's, it's really not, it's not changing the components within the water, but it's actually just concentrating the material that's actually in the source water or supply water.
Okay, so
that answer?
Yeah. So basically, it's going into the unit. I'm just thinking because I've worked with ROs. I've got one at home that I use quite frequently. But so the water goes into the unit. It's going to travel through a micron cartridge, a carbon cartridge, and then through the membrane. So the water's somewhat cleaner by the time it gets to the membrane already. Is that correct?
Yes, it would be. Yeah.
But what you're saying is it's also getting
the
concentrated. So whatever's left in the water, even when it reaches the membrane, at that point, it's only letting water through. So whatever is left is concentrated down and then goes through the waistline.
Correct. And when you think of that, it's actually the dissolved materials that are in the water are not able to. Maybe the easiest way to think of it is it can't fit through the membrane. So as if you think of it just as a dividing wall, but actually wrapped up in a spiral, the water with the dissolved materials can't get through, and then the water that does get through the membrane actually then gets fed through the filtered line side. The water that then is in the waste side is essentially concentrated. So it's taking that supply water line and dividing it into two.
Gotcha. So would the wastewater line technically be worse than your tap water in terms of TDS?
Yeah. Yes. So it is actually concentrating that, and then dependent on what your ratios are, if you're doing a 1-to-4, you're going to concentrate it, well, I guess, 20-25% more TDS value should be in your wastewater. But if you go to a 1-to-2, then you could be as much as 30-60%. I'm trying to think of this off the top of my head.
Gotcha.
But essentially, it will concentrate your TDS in the wastewater. So it should be higher than what the source water was that went into the RO unit.
That's incredible. There's been a misconception that's been out there for, I don't know, as long as I've read about these things when it comes to forums and stuff, which is the wastewater is like Brita water because it's already gone through a micron cartridge and carbon cartridge. So therefore, it must be cleaner. But this is the exact opposite, which is useful information because, like I said, it's commonly thought to be the other way. And it's just not that way. It's actually worse. The TDS is going to be higher.
Correct.
Okay, so Melinda's asked another question. What is flushing the membrane? Which I think we touched on briefly, but what exactly is flushing the membrane?
Okay, so when we were discussing earlier the supply line supply water coming into the membrane housing, I had mentioned about the material actually being in the water, dissolved solids, that type of thing. It's being forced, or they're trying to force those solids through that membrane. And after time, you can get buildup on the membrane that starts to limit the flow of filtered water through the membrane. So by flushing the membrane, it's reducing the pressure on the wastewater side, which has the flow restrictor in it. So by removing the flow restrictor, now the water can flow across the membrane. It essentially goes across the membrane out the wastewater line side. And when it flushes, it's meant to take any particulate material, anything that's maybe clogging the membrane or sitting on the membrane, and flush it out into the wastewater side. So by removing the flow restrictor on the just about any RO unit, you're allowing the filtered water through the micron cartridge and the carbon cartridge to flow past the membrane. And by flowing past the membrane, you're trying to remove anything that may build up on that membrane over a period of time. And the more often you do that, the better you're going to end up actually having a longer life on the membrane, and it may actually keep the membrane's function much higher because you're not continually building up material on the membrane and restricting the membrane's ability to allow the water to pass through into the filtered water line.
Perfect. She's actually got a follow-up question. How much water should run through to flush the membrane?
Usually what you'll find is we'll do anywhere from 20 seconds up to 2 to 3 minutes. It really depends on the frequency that you would actually be doing the flushing. But if you do it each time you use the unit, and if you flushed for 20 seconds to a minute each time you started the unit up, we found that that's sufficient to keep the membrane life.
Perfect.
Higher.
I've noticed, but like before you guys had mentioned that your original RO units, which I thought were really cool when they came out, they were top loading. They seemed really user friendly, and they had some extra features to help make things easier for the end user, because RO at that time just really made it look intimidating, right? So your average customer is going to look at this machine and it's going to look all crazy and they don't want to get involved. Your unit was a lot more friendly looking. Why did you guys decide to move away from that style of RO unit and go back to a much more traditional looking RO? I know for guys like me, totally cool. Don't mind. It looks just like, what you'd expect from our RO unit, and it functions well. I've actually had hands-on experience with your units. So what was the reason for that transition?
Are you referring to the RO Buddy?
No, not the Buddy.
If that's the unit you're referring to.
Your original RO line were those black cased units with the LEDs on the front, and they were top loading. But from what I'm seeing now, you guys have gone back to like the more traditional RO unit with the canisters underneath. And then you've also got your RO Buddy, which is really cool. So you can tell me about that one as well.
Okay. Well, going to the black units, what we were finding specifically with the powered units, a lot of people like the top loading, the functionality and the features, but a lot of people were, how do I want to say this? The initial cost for the entire setup was, I think, or we think it was a little bit more of a barrier for customers. So by actually taking that black unit with the pumps and the high pressure switches and everything like that as a combined unit, we went back through and actually found that more customers were looking for that. I don't want to go pick up water, nothing against the stores, but they were, for convenience factor, they were looking to get the 20 gallons at a time from their home application without actually spending the $400, $500, $600 for an RO unit. So that actually transitioned for us to the RO Buddy. With the RO Buddy, it was a much smaller unit. It's made or intended to be used weekly or every 2 weeks. It's a much smaller unit, but when you go to the smaller unit, you're able to fit it into a spot a lot easier. You have smaller filter cartridges that will last a lot longer. I shouldn't say it wouldn't last a lot longer, but they're not going to get used up as much. A lot of customers, if they're doing 5-gallon water changes or 10-gallon water changes, they're only running 40 or 50 gallons of water through an RO unit at a time. So it becomes more economical on a lower, essentially a lower cost, more economical unit for customers to actually buy an RO unit, feel comfortable with it, and actually use it consistently. Then as we were doing this with the RO Buddy, we went and looked at the componentry that we had in the black unit and said, it would be nice to be able to actually have it so that it can be used for anybody's RO unit. And that's where the Smart Buddy actually came from. So now if you want to buy an entry-level traditional RO unit, you then can upgrade later on, not right away, to adding the Smart Buddy if you don't have enough pressure, if you want to get more production, if you want to add all the additional features, the flush valve assemblies and stuff like that.
Have like the DI to it as well.
Right on. Which, you know what, that actually makes a lot of sense, because cost is always something that's on a customer's mind. And sometimes if they want to reach for the stars but just can't at that moment, they can't get the best unit out there, even though it's something they might want. It's good now for them to have that option where they can purchase an RO unit that's going to function for them. And if they want to, or in the future, have the ability to upgrade to get that dream unit of theirs, like that makes a ton of sense. And I know there's a lot of folks out there who have, over the past, just being in this industry and taking phone calls and talking to customers one-on-one, there's been a demand for a unit like that Smart Buddy RO pump, and just nothing on the market really for it. So, I mean, I was stoked when I first saw that unit come out, and I had a chance to talk to you guys about it. I think you were actually in the building here when I first saw that unit, including like some gigantic, massive RO system that I saw that was like blew my mind. It had like an aluminum rail and everything. It was pretty awesome. I got all fanboy about it, but okay. We have another question. Can I use RO water for a freshwater tank? Well, I can almost start that off for you guys. You definitely can. We were actually talking earlier when we started the show about use for aquariums like discus aquariums or planted tanks. So basically, yeah, you can definitely use an RO system to help bring that water back down to its most basic level so that you can then build it up to where you need it. Tap water in some municipalities or even well water can be extremely hard or have other contaminants in it that you might not want to expose sensitive fish to, like discus, or even expose your planted aquarium to. So what you can do is take your tap water at that point, bring it down to just water. There's nothing else in there, or at least an extremely low TDS, and then use some tap water, bring it back up, or even products like there's RO Rate or other pH buffers, stabilizers, and remineralize the water and get it exactly where you need it to be so that you don't have to worry about whether or not your aquarium is going to suffer from using tap water and just a dechlorinator. For most people, freshwater tanks, tap water is going to be just fine depending on what fish you're keeping. Like cichlids, for instance, they like really hard water. African cichlids specifically, they love it. It's great for them. So you don't always have to bring it down to its most basic level. However, if you're working with species, even African cichlids, again, that are really sensitive and you want to make sure that they've got optimal water, there's always the option to bring it back down to its most basic level through an RO system and then build it back up to where you want it to be. So that way you've only got hardness from the chemicals you want in there, magnesium salts, etc., and you could be avoiding contaminants like copper that you pretty well just don't want in your water ever if you can avoid it unless you're medicating. Did I get that right, you guys?
Well, no. The only thing I was going to add to that was you're creating a consistent water supply. So not knowing what your source water, a lot of municipalities will change depending on if it's the springtime and you're getting a lot of rain, or it's during the summer and there's less rainfall and the TDS values change. So really what you were saying is by taking an RO unit and taking the water back down to its basic component, if you're always building it back up with an RO Rite or a particular cichlid salts or something like that, you're essentially consistently changing the water and doing water changes, or the fish are going to be exposed to a very set water quality that you're not worrying about variables that maybe you didn't consider.
Perfect. Right on. I'm just keeping track of questions here. We've got another one. Does an RODI system or RO system remove chlorine and chloramines? And is there different components? I'll add to this because I know the answer to a degree. Is there a difference between removing chlorine and chloramines when it comes to RO systems?
Yes. Yes. It's actually one of the bigger questions that we do get. Chlorine, the carbon blocks are intended to remove that. The one function that can be a variable is the concentration of chlorine in the water. The chlorine itself can vary from 1 part per million to 3 parts per million. So again, it's very similar to the resin cartridge, where it's a function of the concentration going through the cartridge. Now, chloramines are a completely different animal, and they are used a lot more in areas where the chlorine can evaporate quickly or easily out of the water supply or dissipate out of the water. So they actually take a chlorine and an ammonia type molecule, and it's bound together, and it doesn't want to come out of the water nearly as easily as chlorine does. So we actually have a cartridge specifically for chloramines, and they use either a KDF 85 material or in conjunction with KDF 85, they use a GAC catalytic carbon. And what that's meant to do is be used prior to the carbon cartridge, so it breaks the chloramine bond apart. You can have ammonia in the water. Well, you'll end up having some ammonia in the water and have the chlorine in the water. But you're going to end up being able to pull at least the chlorine out of the water with the secondary carbon cartridge. And then you do have to be conscious of the ammonia that you could potentially still have in the water, because it's not always going to be removed. Ammonia being different stages, gases, that type of thing, it doesn't always come out. And sometimes we'll get people with slight ammonia amounts in the water supply, even after it goes through the membrane or the DI.
Now, will ammonia read as TDS? Like if you're taking TDS on your output water, will the ammonia be accounted for in that TDS reading?
No, not that I've ever seen or heard, but it's not a solid. So it's only going to show up really with like the standard ammonia test kit that you would use for your standard checking pH, ammonia, nitrites, that kind of thing.
Now, one of the things we've brought up a bunch of times, and I don't think we've actually covered it, is TDS. A, what is TDS? B, why is it important to test for? And C, how do you do it?
Well, TDS is total dissolved solids. So it's basically, your general hardness, carbon hardness. It's the amount of dissolved material or minerals that are actually in the water. It's important. It's an easy way to kind of determine what's in your water. So if you have high TDS, basically it's just a indicator of carbonates and different materials that you would actually have in the water, and whether or not, if it's too high, you may be more of a concern to actually do something about it. There's certain parts of the country that have TDS values of 70, and then other parts of the country that are at 500. So there's, like you mentioned, if you have African cichlids, maybe you don't care if you have 500 TDS, it might be fine. So that's kind of a general rule of how to maybe gauge what you're going to keep relative to what your water supply is. But then the biggest thing that we use are actually the TDS meters, whether it's a handheld TDS meter or an inline TDS meter, to kind of keep the parameters in check. It's a good, easy indicator of how the filters are doing and how well they're doing their job. So we use a lot of the inline TDS meters here when we do testing and even for our own production of water.
Perfect. Now, Jess has asked another question, which kind of falls right in line with this, I think, which is, how do I know when it's time to change the cartridges?
What you would want to look at is specifically the cartridge manufacturer's recommendation on how many gallons will pass through. And the big thing to keep in mind with that is, we'll go back to the RO Buddy. The RO Buddy is set up for 1,500 gallons of water, typically 1 part per million of chlorine with the carbon block. So you have to keep in mind that if you make 1 gallon of water, but you pass 2 or 3 gallons of wastewater through, you've really filtered 4 gallons of water through the carbon block. So that has to be used within the calculation. you don't want to necessarily say 1,500 gallons, and then the 1,500 gallons is actually filtered water. You need to keep it in mind that the manufacturers are going to give a rating based on total water flow through the cartridges.
Right. So,
and then the thing that I do with a lot of customers, sorry. And did we freeze up here?
No, sorry about that. Yeah, continue.
Nope. Yeah, continue. Well, what I was mentioning is a lot of the times I'll go and work through with a customer that they're making 10 gallons a week, but that means 10 gallons a week maybe on the high side if they don't have the flush valves and all that type of thing in place. Maybe they're using 50 gallons of water total through those filter cartridges a week. And if they're doing it once a week, and then if you calculate 1,200 gallons, you get, X amount a week. So then you can say, okay, every 6 months, based off of what your water changes are, you would want to change that. And I use Sharpies for everything here, whether it's my light bulbs or my filter cartridges. I mean, that way I put the date on it. When I set it up, I have an idea of how many gallons I've run through the unit, and I know approximately when I need to change it.
Perfect. One thing I've personally done to try to keep track, because I'm admittedly not as good at you as keeping track of when I put things in places. I change bulbs when they start giving me a crappy output, when I bust out the lux meter. So one thing I've always kind of done is taken a reading after I change my cartridges using a TDS meter on my input going into the unit and output. And it kind of tells me how crappy the water is going in, number one, and what kind of use I'm getting out of the cartridges in terms of how clean my water is coming out of the unit. So when I start to see that creep up beyond what I consider reasonable or usable even, I like to shoot for a 0 TDS in the reefing world. So if I start to get above 0 TDS, I immediately start changing things. So you can use a TDS meter to kind of tell whether or not your cartridges are doing what they're supposed to. But I would have to agree and say that maybe just keeping track of the dates they went in and how much water you put through them is a good idea. I wish I was better at keeping track of things. My wife probably wishes that too.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that does exist, and I don't see a lot of people using them, we have used them, is there's actually flow meters that will calculate how many gallons that you've actually run through the RO unit. They're relatively inexpensive, but it will actually allow you to put 2 or 3 cartridges within the system. So you can say, the first cartridge I want 1,500 gallons, the second cartridge I want 2,000. So it'll actually give you an indicator that says, you know what, the 1,500 gallon set point has been met, and it's time to change out your micron cartridge or your carbon cartridge, and then the micron cartridge you go to 2,000. So there's a couple other ways to go around it. Going to your resin cartridge, have you considered, by the way, once the TDS value starts to creep up in your resin cartridge, if you actually run 2 of them in daisy or in series, what you can do is actually let it exhaust completely out of the first resin cartridge, and the unit. Let me think how to explain this. When I talk to a customer on the phone, if we're measuring the TDS coming out of the membrane, and the membrane TDS is 10, but you're getting 0 after the resin cartridge, which is fantastic. That's what you're looking for. But if you start seeing the resin cartridge creep up to 1 to 2, what you could do is if you actually have 2 of those cartridges in series, you can exhaust the first cartridge completely. And once that cartridge then reaches 10, then you know what, I need to change that one. Take the one that's in the secondary position, make it primary, put the new one in the series, following. So you really exhaust the resin to its fullest. If you're really looking to try and get the most bang out of it, because, some of those resin cartridges will last a long time after the resin or the TDS starts to creep up a little bit. So it's not a bad thing. I've seen a lot of people do recommend having 2 of them and then just swapping positions and then replacing or refilling the other one. So
I like that idea. You've planted an idea in my brain, and I'm going to have to go spend some money. So Thanks, but I think it'll save me some cash in the long run. So that's an awesome tip. You know what? I never thought of that, and I wish I did. I don't know why I haven't. I've been using RO for like, I don't know, 10 years now, and I haven't come up with that. And now that explains why I see some units that all like incorporate that dual DI resin on the back end of the unit. Mm-hmm. That makes perfect sense. We basically covered the ins and outs of RO from what I would think is pretty well start to finish. Awesome. We just have one of our viewers here saying they're learning so much. And you know what? That's exactly why we're doing this. So we can learn and get the information out there because there's a lot of misconstrued information out on the interwebs. People on forums are just that most of the time, just people on forums. And a lot of the time they say things that they don't actually know are fact. It could just be word of mouth or a common misconception that is continuing to carry through the ages. So having these discussions with our experts and our vendors, like we've got today, Aquatic Life with us, it helps a lot. And I'm really glad to see that our viewers are benefiting from it and our customers are benefiting from it because I benefit from it. So I would have to assume they would as well. So what I was about to say there was we pretty much cover RO from the beginning to the end. And I see a lot of companies out there with a huge array of RO units that all have differing components. And like I've seen units that have, like I said, dual stage DI on the end. I've seen units that have like 6 canisters on the bottom. They're all white, so I don't know what's in them. And then 3 membranes on top. I've seen units that have all kinds of wires and pumps up top as well. So my question that I'm leading into is, with your line of RO products, which is a very concise line, which personally I think is a good thing because it makes life a lot less confusing for the customer. But with all those options out there, when you boiled it down to the line that you guys have, how did you come to those decisions and why did you decide to stay away from all these other crazy contraptions that I've seen in terms of RO?
So we've really just tried to make our product offering modular. So, instead of having a system with 5 canisters on it, we've got like our RO Junior, which is a standard looking unit, but then we also have, like the RO Buddy here. But then, if you want the DI, you need the DI, you can just add it right to the unit by snapping it on. Same thing goes, if you need to increase the pressure, if you don't have enough pressure at your house, it's modular. You can just add the Smart Buddy booster pump to it. So we just felt like it was better for people to be able to customize what they're looking for instead of needing to buy the whole thing.
Solid answer. And you know what? It makes perfect sense. And like I mentioned previously, the fact that you've gone and separated the technology with the pump from the units to make the units at the start even just more affordable for your average consumer or hobbyist, but still having it as an option to upgrade to in the future so that they can have that dream system eventually without it being such a large upfront investment. Brilliant idea. At the end of the day, Aquatic Life in general, this is just going to be my straight up opinion because I've been using Aquatic Life products now for the better part of probably 7 years, maybe even longer. It's hard for me to keep track. I've been doing this so long, it's all a blur. But I've been using them from when I started reefing pretty well way back in the day. As soon as you guys came out with your T5 lights, I was on that because the units were great. Reliable, which is a word I constantly use when it comes to Aquatic Life products. You guys stand behind your product, which is something I really appreciate, especially for a customer. And I say that because of this. When you are a call center representative or working face-to-face retail with the customer, it's a lot easier when the company that you purchase that product and then sell it to a customer, when they stand behind that product and have a fantastic warranty and have a fantastic reliability, it makes my transaction with that customer so much more enjoyable for both I and the customer. Because not only do I have a confidence in selling them a product I'm probably never going to see again because it's going to work perfectly until that person is no longer in the hobby, but it makes it easy for them in the fact that if they need to do something with that product, if there was a failure, they've got you to support them, just like they have us there to support them. Aquatic Life fantastic products all across the board. They've got a lot of lighting products. Like I said, I started off with your T5 units, the 4 bulbs I've been using for a long time. I still own them. I still use them. The marquee lights that have recently been released. I say recently, but that's, I think, your newest T5 light. And then you guys got into the LED game, and I've been using your LED fixtures since the first LED unit. You guys put out the reef-capable LED system. And they're all great products. Anybody who gets an Aquatic Life product, in my opinion, is getting a lot more than that product. They're getting probably one of the best warranties and customer support that I've seen in the industry. So I just wanted to personally thank you guys for that, and just let everybody who's watching this know that that's what you can expect when you get involved with Aquatic Life, whether it's RO units all the way up to their lighting products. Honestly, I got to tip my hat where the hat must be tipped. You guys, probably the best customer support that I can think of in this industry. It's always been great. Anytime I've needed anything for a customer, you guys have been on it. Anytime I've needed anything for anything I've owned, whether or not I called as my celebrity Big Al self, or just literally shot you guys an email from a personal account and said, hey, this busted. You guys have been on it. That's that. That is our third blab that we've done. Thank you so much, guys, once again for coming out. It's been awesome chatting with you. And if you guys out there have any questions at all or anything like that after the blab, maybe you were too shy to ask during, you can hit me up with an email. You can hit up Aquatic Life with an email. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much and take care.